Well, hey, good morning and welcome to Trinity Church. We are a church all about connecting people to Christ. And so whether this is your first time here or you've been coming for years, we hope that Trinity can be a place for you to feel like you belong and you're able to grow in your relationship with Jesus. My name is Pastor Mike. I am one of the pastors here. And as Victoria was kind of prefacing, we are starting a brand new series today called Achilles' Heel. And as we go through this series, we are going to be doing a character study of 4 different people from the Bible that allow us to take a look and reflection about how even people with enormous faith, people who have done incredible things for God, can still have weaknesses. And it is a reminder to all of us that even God's most faithful followers aren't immune to having weaknesses or blind spots, me and you included. And so as we go through this series, we'll be talking about the ways in which we sometimes ignore those weaknesses to disastrous effects. But first off, many of you have probably heard this term Achilles' heel before, but if you have never actually heard where it comes from, I love Greek mythology, and so I just want to nerd out for a second and share the story of where this came from. So Achilles was this mighty warrior from Greek mythology. And this is a depiction of him on a Grecian vase from about 300 BC. But my guess is that this is not the Achilles that most of you guys are picturing in your head right now. This is probably the Achilles that y'all are imagining in your head. Brad Pitt from the 2004 movie Troy. But here's the thing, actually that movie got a lot of things right to the mythology, particularly that Achilles was regarded as a hero of the Trojan War, as recorded in Homer's The Iliad. And in this story, Greece is going to war with Troy, and there is a prophecy to say that the Greeks will fail unless Achilles fights. And so eventually the king of Greece, Agamemnon, recruits Achilles to be a part of his army, and Achilles is just as spectacular as advertised. That in fact, he leads an army that ends up conquering 12 cities around Troy before the penultimate battle that we often recognize as the Trojan horse story. That he goes undefeated in battle, and in fact, Achilles is so feared that when he challenges the strongest warrior in Troy, Hector, to a one-on-one duel, Hector's family give him funeral rites before the battle even starts. That's how little confidence they have that he's going to beat Achilles. And sure enough, Achilles wins the duel, and to taunt the Trojans, takes Hector's body, ties it up behind his chariot, and drives around the city. That, however, is the highest point of Achilles' life because we don't actually know how he died according to Homer, but the Odyssey, which is the next epic poem that Homer writes, begins with Achilles' funeral. So we know that the Greeks won, we know that Achilles died in that final battle somewhere, but then legends and myths started to arise afterwards, and particularly this idea that Achilles was so strong as a warrior because he was made invincible by the gods. That when he was young, his mother had dipped him into the river Styx, the river leading to the underworld, and that had made him invulnerable over his entire body except for with the foot that his mother dipped him with that didn't get submerged, leaving his heel vulnerable. And that Achilles was legend has it that Achilles was eventually taken down by a single arrow through his heel. And this story has captivated people for centuries. People have loved this story, and eventually in 17th century France, physicians began referring to the tendon that connects your calf down to your heel as the Achilles tendon in reference to this story. And anybody who's an avid sports fan knows that a rupture of your Achilles tendon can be one of the most devastating in sports. That in fact, up until about 5 years ago, this was pretty much a career-ending injury for anybody who sustained it. And this story is a reminder for us as Christians as we begin to look at our biblical characters, that just like even the strongest warriors and most incredible athletes are not invulnerable, no matter how strong they are, no matter how athletic they are, they still are not invulnerable. We as Christians never fully escape our vulnerability to temptation and sin. And to do so often comes if we ignore our weaknesses, it comes at the price of devastating consequences. And so we're going to look at some biblical characters who have been incredibly faithful at times, who have been commissioned by God, but eventually there has been a trait or weakness that has led to their downfall. And so today we are telling the story of Samson. Now, most of you guys might be like, I know the story of Samson. I heard about it in Sunday school growing up. My guess is unless you've read it, no, you don't. That this story is one of the more gruesome among our Bible stories. And I will never forget this moment where I was working at a Bible camp, and I was a team leader, which meant that I was in charge of 12 other counselors. And one of the things that I had encouraged my counselors to do is to begin each day with first word, which was that they would wake their kids up by reading from the Bible, and that they would do last word, which is before kids went to sleep, the last thing that they would hear is a reading from the Bible. Now, the upside of this is that if they stayed awake, then they got to hear the Word of God, and then nobody was allowed to say anything else. And at worst, kids might fall asleep during the reading, and everybody gets a good night's sleep, right? So one of the counselors that was on my team, his name was Joe. And I remember there was this week where he was in charge of our Alpha campers, which was 4th graders through 6th graders. And he comes up to me and he says, "Hey, Mike, guess what? I did last word last night." And I was like, "Hey, cool, that's great." And he goes, "Well, actually, I read them the story of Samson from the Bible." And I said, "You did what?" And he goes, "Oh, so you've read it." And I was like, "Yeah, I've read it. It's Bible camp." And he's like, I was like, what were you thinking? Like, you didn't preview it beforehand? And he was like, "I don't know. Like, I just remembered this story from Sunday school, like strong guy, long hair, right?" Apparently, there's more to it than that. So anyway, we were able to laugh about it later, but yes, we learned the importance of previewing Bible stories before reading them to kids that day. And it is the reason why we have prefaced for you guys, this is kind of your last warning, that we are going to be talking about some adult themes in this message. But we do start with the cute and cuddly version of this story, which is the birth of Samson. That the way that Samson's story starts, and this is what sets the scene, that Samson lives at a time in between Moses and the kings. And so Moses has brought the people up to the promised land. Joshua conquered the promised land, but they are still struggling with the natives who are there, particularly the Philistines. And there are still this big tribal culture, and the Philistines are a really big problem for God's people. But you have these moments where the Israelites are faithful to God, and then they walk away from God, and then they're faithful, and then they walk away. So God sends judges, people who have both temporal authority and spiritual authority, to intercede on his behalf and to protect his people. So it says at the beginning of Samson's story, again, the Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight, so the Lord handed them over to the Philistines, who oppressed them for 40 years. This is really important context, that the Israelites had been under Philistine oppression for 40 years, and it was kind of their fault that they had strayed away from God, and so God was like, "Fine, if you're not going to follow me, then you can be ruled by the godless Philistines." And yet it was not a great time for the Israelites. And so this is the situation that Samson is born into. In those days, a man named Manoah from the tribe of Dan lived in the town of Zorah. His wife was unable to become pregnant, and they had no children. Then the angel of the Lord appeared to Manoah's wife and said, "Even though you have been unable to have children, you will soon become pregnant and give birth to a son. So be careful. You must not drink wine or any other alcoholic drink, nor eat any forbidden food. You will become pregnant and give birth to a son, and his hair must never be cut. for he will be dedicated to God as a Nazirite from birth, and he will begin to rescue Israel from the Philistines. So, recapping that, Samson's mom was unable to become pregnant. She was probably infertile, and an angel comes and says, I'm going to bless you with a son, and this son is going to do God's bidding, particularly that he is going to begin the rescue of my people of Israel from the hands of the Philistines. And one of the things is that he gives Samson a vulnerability. He says that his hair must never be cut, and he must never drink alcohol, which reminds all of us that we can still be chosen by God and still be vulnerable. We can receive God's commission in our life, but that doesn't make us impervious to what life may throw at us. That in fact, God's calling does not mean that we are personally invincible. And yet, we also read from this story that he is given great strength, and that Samson's strength is a gift from God. And unfortunately, as we read through this story, Samson's pride will make him forget that. So, let's dive into the real story of Samson. And so, Samson, as he grows up, he's no longer a baby, he's an adult. One day he is strolling around and he sees a beautiful woman and says, man, I would like her to be my wife. The problem is that this woman that he sees is a Philistine woman. And so he goes back home to his mom and dad and he says, Mom, Dad, I have just seen the most beautiful woman ever. I would like you to go talk to her parents and arrange a wedding for us. And like any good Jewish parents, they go back to Samson and they're like, Samson, really? Can't you find a nice Jewish girl? And Samson is like, you guys don't get it. She's like really, really hot. Can you please set this up for me? And eventually they relent and they set up this marriage between him and this Philistine woman. And as the day for their wedding is about to arrive, Samson is going on a journey, and as he is going on this journey, he is attacked by a young lion. And Samson, in his strength, not only defeats this lion with his bare hands, but actually kills it by grabbing it by the jaws and ripping it open like that. Now, Samson is so proud of himself that even after he survives this encounter with the lion, he comes back a couple of days later to inspect his handiwork, to be like, I wonder where that thing happened. And he goes back and he finds the lion, and he finds that a bunch of bees have started a hive in the carcass of the lion and have started making honey in there. And Samson does something that I think is pretty gross. He dips his hand into the carcass of the lion, brings out some honey, and tastes it, and is like, oh, this is the best thing ever. And so he takes the honey and he puts it in a little container and he brings it back to his parents and gives it to his parents. Now, some unspoken no-no about this is that one of the Nazirite vows is to not touch dead things. And so Samson is already off on the wrong foot. But then he eventually gets to this wedding, and he is surrounded by Philistines. His family is probably the only Jewish family that is there, and his wedding party has 30 people in it. Now, Samson, in his pride, decides to have a little bit of fun and decides to make a wager with his groomsmen. He says, look, I have a riddle for you, and if you solve my riddle, then I will give each of you a set of fine linen clothing. But if you do not solve my riddle, then each of you owes me a set of fine linen clothing. Now, for us, we don't respect the value of clothes as much as they did way back in that day, but the equivalent of what he was asking for was making a wager that would have been worth tens of thousands of dollars. This was not a small wager at all. And so eventually the guys are like, there's 30 of us and only one of him. We have 7 days to figure it out. Certainly we are going to win this bet. And so they're like, we agree to your bet. Let's shake on it and tell us your riddle. So Samson tells this riddle where he says, out of the one who eats came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. Samson is referencing this scene that he just had with the lion, which I don't know who in their right mind would ever guess from Samson's personal encounters to solve this riddle. So Samson is very confident that he is going to win this bet. And as the men are contemplating, trying to figure out what it is, eventually they get frustrated. It says 3 days later, they were still trying to figure it out. And on the fourth day, they said to Samson's wife, entice your husband to explain the riddle for us, or we will burn down your father's house with you in it. Did you invite us to this party just to make us poor? And so, believably and understandably, his new bride is like, man, they're threatening my parents and threatening me that they're going to burn our house down with us in it. And so she goes to Samson and asks for the answer to the riddle. And Samson rebuffs her, being like, man, I haven't even told my parents about this. Like, I'm not going to tell you. And this happens for a couple of days, the 5th day, the 6th day. But then on the 7th day, when the bet is to come to fruition, finally his wife pleads and pleads and pleads and pleads and pleads so that he might give her the answer. And finally, Samson relents. And so his wife knows the answer to the riddle and goes and tells it to the 30 men who are threatening her. And it says, before the sunset of the 7th day, the men of the town came to Samson with their answer. What is sweeter than honey? And what is stronger than a lion? And Samson's reply to them, correctly guessing his riddle, is anger. Samson replies, if you hadn't plowed with my heifer, you wouldn't have solved my riddle. And yes, this is absolutely a euphemism for, I think that you just slept with my wife, because how in the world would you know this riddle if you wouldn't have done that? And so Samson gets extremely angry, and it says that the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him, and he went down to the town of Ashkelon, killed 30 men, took their belongings, and gave their clothing to the men who had solved his riddle. Yikes. I don't know what Samson's logic here is, but instead of taking out his anger on the men that he had an issue with, he goes to some random town nearby, ends up murdering and stealing from them so that he could pay off his wager, because apparently not coming through on your bets is somehow worse than murdering and stealing from people. I don't know. I don't know what the logic is. But eventually, I think what we can see from this story is that this is where pride can really negatively affect us. You see, Samson's pride made him lash out at others for things that was his own fault. And in the same way, it can do it to us as well. That Samson didn't need to make this wager. Samson didn't need to take out his anger on these unrelated people. And yet, in his pride, he ends up lashing out at the wrong people. I wonder how many of you feel like you are constantly lashing out at your spouse, or your kids, or your coworkers. Does it ever feel like you are surrounded by people who are either incompetent or lacking in integrity? Often it is our pride that makes us see everyone else as the problem, rather than seeing what's wrong in ourselves. And in doing so, in the same way that Samson lashes out, sometimes we end up hurting the people around us, even when they are not the source of our issues. And yet, Samson is not done yet. Samson has other deeds of strength and or power, and they are just as dubious as the first, which is that Samson then leaves the wedding and he storms off and he returns to the house of his mother and father, leaving his new bride in her hometown with the other Philistines. And we don't know how long he left her there or how long they were apart, but eventually Samson decides, look, I married her, I would like to honor that, and I would like to be with her. And so he goes back to the town only to realize that they had already married his bride off to his best man, thinking that surely after this incident where he stormed off and killed a bunch of guys, that he was never coming back. Upon hearing that his bride had married somebody else in the wedding party, Samson again becomes super angry and responds this way. He ends up burning down the local food supply by catching 300 foxes, tying torches to their tails, and then letting them go in the grain fields. And as the grain fields end up going up in flames, of course the Philistines feel like they need to retaliate, so they send 1,000 men after Samson. And they end up capturing him and tying up with cords. But then Samson, because he is given extraordinary strength by God, breaks through the ropes that he had been tied with, ends up grabbing the discarded jawbone of a donkey, and ends up killing all 1,000 of them. As if this story wasn't enough yet, Samson on his way out is still like, well, I didn't get to sleep with my wife, so I'm going to sleep with somebody else, and stops at a brothel and sleeps with a prostitute. And the pursuing Philistines end up coming and surrounding the town, and they say, now we got him this time. We're going to bar the gate, and then we're going to wait for him by the other entrance, that when he comes out, we'll all swarm him and attack him. And Samson, in his great strength, wakes up around midnight, realizes that he is being surrounded, goes to the gate that they try to lock with a heavy bar that only several men would have been able to lift at a time, and he lifts it all by himself and carries the lock out of the city and escapes them. So, happy Mother's Day. All of y'all who are like, oh, I came to church for a nice, uplifting message. Yeah. But here's the thing. Samson, before he does all of these things, says, this time I cannot be blamed for everything I am going to do to you, Philistines. That Samson feels justified for all of these actions. And here's the thing about pride. That pride makes us feel like we can't be blamed for our misdeeds. When we are prideful, we often think, well, it's not my fault. They started it. Pride makes us think, maybe they deserved it. I am only acting out because that is just what the world has made me into. And if I'm a villain, it's because the world made me this way, and it's not my fault. And so often I feel we do the same thing. That when we have pride, we end up externalizing the blame for the issues that are happening in our life onto other people. We sometimes do awful things to people that we love and care about or are close to us. And we end up saying, well, it's not my fault. That's just the way things are. Without ever taking a moment of introspection to say, what is my involvement in this? What did I do to be able to cause what is happening now? And yet, Samson's story is not done yet. In fact, the story that most of you are probably most familiar with is the story of Samson and Delilah. Because eventually, Samson does fall in love again, and he falls in love with this woman, Delilah. And his enemies, the Philistines, who eventually hear about him falling in love with Delilah, they concoct a plan. They go to Delilah and say, if you figure out Samson's weakness, we will give you 1,100 pieces of silver, which is an astronomical amount. Again, remember that Judas sold out Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. And here the Philistines are offering Delilah 1,000 pieces of silver. And so Delilah, in her weakness, agrees to the bribe. And she ends up going to Samson saying, what is your secret? What makes you so strong? How could anybody ever contain you? And so Samson, maybe having learned his lesson from before, decides not to give up the answer to his riddle right away and says, if I am tied up with 7 bowstrings, then I will be restrained. And so at night, Delilah wraps him up in 7 bowstrings, and then the Philistines come and attack. And Delilah wakes Samson up, going, Samson, Samson, the Philistines are here, they're attacking us. And Samson, just in a moment of adrenaline, breaks out of the bowstrings and defends his house and forces the Philistines away. Now, this ends up happening 2 more times, which makes me think that Samson may not be all that bright. Because the second time, he tells Delilah that if he is wrapped up in a cord that has never been used before, in rope that has never been used before, it will restrain him. And same thing happens where the Philistines attack. He breaks out of his restraints and he defeats the Philistines. Then a third time, he tells Delilah that if his hair gets tangled up in a loom made for weaving clothing, then he'll be able to be restrained, and that doesn't work either. And eventually, Delilah gets really frustrated, and she says, "Don't you love me? Because if you really loved me, you wouldn't keep any secrets from me." And eventually, that is what breaks Samson. And Samson says, "Fine, I do love you, and I will tell you my secret." And finally, he shared his secret with her, saying, "My hair has never been cut," he confessed. "For I was dedicated to God as a Nazirite from birth. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as anyone else." Now, it's important for us to know that there are no good guys in this story. Not the Philistines, not Delilah, and maybe not even Samson. You see, Samson reveals his secret not just because Delilah asked, but because he overestimated himself. Samson said, "Man, I was fine before. I will still be fine regardless of whether I follow God's instructions or not. That I am strong independently of God, and I'm going to be okay just like I have been all the other times." You see, our pride makes us flirt with the temptation that maybe we don't need God, that we can play with fire and we can do things that we know that we shouldn't do because we think that we're stronger than that, and that we will be fine and we will be left unscarred from these incidents. Pride deludes us into thinking that maybe we're strong on our own and maybe we don't need God's help. And yet, here we are, all of us as vulnerable as ever. And Samson quickly finds that he is not invulnerable. For while he is sleeping, Delilah shaves his head and again invites the Philistines to attack. And this time, Samson gets up, ready to repel this invading force like he had done every other time, and he is unsuccessful. And he is captured by the Philistines, and this time the Philistines are not taking any chances, and they immediately gouge out his eyes, put him in chains, and put him to work pushing a millstone that grinds grain. And that leads us to Samson's final act. That it took all of this, his eyes being gouged out, being captured by his enemy, being made a slave, for him to finally learn some humility. And as Samson is pushing on this millstone, he ends up turning back to God. And it says that then Samson prayed to the Lord, "Sovereign Lord, remember me again. Oh God, please strengthen me just one more time." And while Samson is praying, God hears him. That God listens. And in Samson's humility, God returns his strength to him as his hair grows back. And eventually there is this penultimate moment in Samson's life where he is in the temple of Dagon, which is the false god of the Philistines, and he is standing between 2 pillars. And as he is praying to God, he says, "God, I will sacrifice my own life if only I can take these evil Philistines down with me." And he ends up pushing 2 of the support pillars down all by himself. And it crashes the temple on him and 3,000 of the leaders of the Philistines. And what we get from this moment is that Samson's humility and prayer allows his strength to return. And despite all of the things that Samson has done in his life, he is remembered fondly by the Jewish people. Not as somebody who is perfect, but it says that because of Samson's deeds, the Israelites enjoyed 20 years of peace from Philistine oppression while Samson ruled. And so somehow God used this imperfect person to still bring about his commission, which was to protect his people. And yet, even as the Jewish people might celebrate Samson as a hero, we, in our perspective, have to struggle with him as a bit of an anti-hero. Somebody who is a cautionary tale, somebody who is commissioned by God to do good things, and by his own pride ended up not always doing the right thing. And for us, we have to ask ourselves, where has pride blinded us? Where are those moments in which we have thought so much of ourselves that we have damaged our relationships and we have hurt the people around us? You see, sometimes it can well up in small ways, that in our marriages we sometimes build up resentment when we begin in our prideful selves to think, I'm the only one that is pulling the weight in this relationship. Guys, it is often us thinking, well, I'm the provider, and therefore once my providing is done, once I'm done with my work day, then I don't need to help with anything else. And women, sometimes that pride feels like I am holding this house together. And my husband, who doesn't even know the name of our kid's doctor, if he was in charge of this house, it would fall apart. As soon as we begin to think that we are the only ones who are working, the only ones who are propping up our loved ones in our lives, maybe that is the moment in which pride has captured us. If you find yourself in a situation where you're looking at your family or your coworkers or your neighbors, and you feel like you are just constantly surrounded by evil idiots, maybe it's because you haven't taken the time to be curious. Maybe your pride has gotten the best of you. And maybe it's not that everybody else is the problem, but that you are ignoring the ways that you have brought these problems on yourself. And yet, in the middle of it, there's still good news. One of the things that gives me heart from Samson's story is that no matter how broken he was, no matter how many times he had sinned, God still listened to him. And it reminds me that no matter how far we stray, God still hears us when we pray. That it is never too late for us to turn back to God's original intention for our life. It is never too late for us to humble ourselves in front of God and to ask for him to strengthen us again. And so no matter what you're feeling in your life right now, whether it is brokenness in your situation or your relationships, know that it is not too late for you to come to God humbly in prayer and know that God is going to hear you and know that God is going to respond accordingly. That even if the problems in your life, even if you brought them on yourself, God still forgives you. And God still wants to see the best for you. And all he asks is for us to bring a little humility. Amen? Let's pray. Gracious God, we are sorry for the ways in which we have let pride well up in our hearts, that we have deluded ourselves into thinking that our strength and our abilities have come from us, rather than remembering that they are gifts from you. God, we are sorry for the ways that we have hurt the people around us, for the ways that we have forgotten to say sorry because we've felt justified. God, help open our eyes that we might not be blind to our own weaknesses, but that we can give them over and surrender to you. Help us to be a people who walk humbly with you, being your example and having our eyes to you, that we might not brush off the ways that we stray, but can admit them and give them over to you. So God, be with your people. Continue to intercede in our lives in the moments that we need you the most, and strengthen us to do your good work. God, for all these things, we lift up to you, that we love you, we trust you.